none of this would exist, right, without the buyers in the United States and without the supply of guns in the United States. So it goes both ways, right? It's the consumers of these drugs that allow this business to flourish here in the United States. And it's the easy supply of guns from the United States down to Mexico that allows the cartels to survive.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. Today we're going to be talking about the global criminal underworld with my guest, Mariana van Zeller. Mariana is a Portuguese-American journalist and documentary filmmaker renowned for her investigative reporting on global crime and black market networks. She began her media career in Portugal, later moving to the U.S. and London to produce independent documentaries and deepen her reporting expertise, including studying Arabic in Damascus. The latest season of her show Trafficked, Season 5, premiered on July 19th, 2025. Episode 1 was about cartels in the United States. Episode 2, Scam City, investigating Southeast Asia's epicenter of romance and investment scams, known as pig butchering. Episode 3 was the Trank Dope Underworld, examining the mysterious next wave of America's opioid crisis. And Episode 4 was Brides for Sale, where she traveled to Vietnam to investigate reports that young women are being trafficked into China to be sold as unwilling brides. Let's dive into the episode. If you could explain just how powerful the cartels have become in the U.S., the size of their presence, and maybe even dive into what makes their influence seemingly so difficult to either dismantle or destroy. I know that's a super broad question, but it allows us to go from big to small.
Well, one of the shocking things that we found out, I've been covering the cartel for many years now. I think I've reported more from Sinaloa and Mexico than anywhere else in the world outside of the U.S. And I think what even shocked me was when we started, I realized, having reported on the cartel, that they have a huge presence here in the U.S. But so I wanted to do a story about just what is that presence? What does that mean for the U.S.? How is it what impact is it having on law enforcement, on society at large? And I think one of the things that shocked me as soon as we started reporting was realizing that a lot of these cells are operating from small town America. So, we usually think drug violence, we think big criminal organizations, we tend to think New York, LA, Chicago. But through our reporting, what we found out is when we started wanting to meet with these cartel operators here in the U.S., that a lot of them were operating, again, in really small town American, even as far as Alaskan, like small towns in Alaska. And we, one of the scenes we filmed was with Georgia Bureau of Investigations. They have a great team out there, and we were in sort of rural Georgia doing where we interviewed two agents who had basically brought down a cartel cell operation that was operating in rural Georgia, where it was a crazy, crazy story. They got a call from a guy who owns a cottage in the woods and rents it on Airbnb. And they got a call, 911 got a call from this guy saying, I have my surveillance cameras outside my house, my Airbnb, and I'm seeing they're bringing in like a body into my Airbnb rental. And
What?
Yeah, it was police. It's insane. And the police, the local police went there and realized that there was something bigger happening, because basically they brought in the body and then left with bags or something that was suspicious to the owner of this Airbnb rental. And the police was called, and then eventually the FBI was called, or the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, were called. And what they found was that there was this woman who, the leader of this cartel cell in Georgia, she was a drug distributor for them, and that the leader believed that she was skimming money from him. And so they had called her into this house, and they had tortured her in a bathtub. They had cut off her, I think it was a chainsaw, cut off parts of her body. They had used pliers to cut off her fingers. But they had done a really good job of cleaning it all out. So they couldn't find any evidence that this had happened, but they knew something had happened here. So it was this agent that when they started looking inside, they decided to open the drain for the bathtub and realized that
Yep.
there was lots of evidence there. And again, this is like small town America with a cell that's sort of connected to the cartel. So yeah, this is unfortunately happening all across the U.S.
Would you say they have presence in all 50 states?
I would say yes, absolutely. I mean, through our reporting, finding out that everywhere. I mean, we spoke to sources that had presence in Alaska or that talked about operations in Alaska and North and South Dakota. I mean, yeah, it was wild. I didn't expect it, and I think to me, a couple of other things that were really shocking in that story was first of all, we interviewed a guy who was American, El Gringo,
Hmm.
who goes by the name of El Gringo, obviously not his real nickname, but he's American, born and raised in the U.S., doesn't even speak Spanish, and is one of the biggest distributors for the cartel here in the United States. And for me, that was shocking. And he told me that that is actually quite common too, that they use a lot of American citizens to distribute their drugs. So to me, that was surprising. I didn't know that that was. I knew that obviously they work with some collaboration from Americans, but I didn't know it was so widespread. And then the other thing was that yeah, the corruption angle and the agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation spoke to me about this. A bunch of different law enforcement groups I've spoken to have talked about this, but there is so much money that we're talking about, right? It's the drug business alone.
Yeah.
It's estimated at over $600 billion a year, billion. So, and the cartel is making, yeah, billions of dollars from this illegal trade. And when you're talking about this much money, it's easy, unfortunately, to corrupt people, But we're talking about border patrol, we're talking about small town sheriffs, but we're talking about federal agencies as well. And that was the scariest part is with the cartel, they bring in the violence, they bring in the drugs, the deadly
Hmm.
drugs, but they are also bringing in corruption. And once that affects our government, obviously
It's a
that's a huge
problem.
problem for all of us.
Yeah, I want to talk about El Gringo and the Americans, but I'm curious your thoughts on this. I've talked to a few people who report on the cartels, and it seems as if it's not difficult for them to find sources that are in the cartels that will talk to journalists. And I'm just curious
Why?
why. Yes, I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about criminal enterprises. For clarity, I have no criminal enterprises. I'm not involved in them. But if I was, I think one of the first things that I would not do is talk to a reporter. I'm fascinated why they're so willing to talk to the press.
I don't think they talk to all reporters. I think you have to know the right people. I have been reporting on the cartel for many years, so I think there's a trust there. I also
Hmm.
I work with one of the best journalists in Mexico that has a lot of connections and sources in the cartel. It's the same person I've worked with for decades now, and there's a lot of trust both ways. I know that I call him and I say, "Hey, Miguel, we're looking." His name is Miguel Angel Vega, he's an amazing journalist, and I call him and I say, "Hey, Miguel, we're doing a story about shark fins or fentanyl or guns, and do you know anyone who's connected to this in the world of the cartel?" And it's either a yes or a no, and then once if it's a yes and he's found some people that are willing to talk, first there's a meeting, right? They want to meet us face to face without the cameras. They want to make sure that I am in fact a journalist, that I'm
Hmm.
not, a DA agent, for example, and there's that. But I would say at the end of the day, Andy, to answer your question, there's three main reasons I think people talk to me. It's impunity. I mean, particularly in Mexico, particularly in places like Sinaloa, right, where there's so much corruption. It's not as if the police doesn't know who
Hmm.
works in these cartels or where they're operating from, but
Yeah,
there's
for
just a lot
sure.
of corruption. So they don't see a downside to speaking to a journalist like myself. Secondly, I think it's wanting to boast, right? Ego, wanting to say that the Sinaloa cartel. I've interviewed like the Cartel del Golfo in Colombia. One story we did about organ trafficking and for cocaine trafficking as well. And yeah, there's so many different groups and cartels, criminal groups in that area that they just want to talk about how theirs is the best, right? Anyone, do you know who runs the biggest fentanyl operation in Mexico? It's us, there's boasting about it. And yeah, it's like cool, right? You have a 22-year-old Sicario who, just one amongst hundreds or thousands of Sicarios. And here comes an international team of journalists that are willing to put him in a cool looking mask and where he's holding a gun and he can boast about what he does. So there's a certain like street cred, I think, that comes with that.
Yeah.
And then I think the most important reason that I will always say, and it's often forgotten, which is just the wanting to be understood. I approach
Mm.
all the people that I interview with empathy, and I tell them, look, I'm not here to judge them, to judge you. I have not walked a second in your shoes. I don't know what your life is like. I don't know where you came from. And I think it's much more important and valid for me to sit down with you and try to understand why you do what you do than it is to judge you. And I think that really goes a long way. People want to be understood.
I can understand, especially in a place like Mexico, where I would say the cartels, I hope, have a more established footprint than here in the U.S.
Right.
Historically, at least. I guess I could understand them, especially through the lens of impunity, talking to the press. Here in the U.S., though, small town America, I'm trying to think of what the upside would be. Because even if you were anonymous, if you were to talk about specific regions or zones, that could, in fact, swing a little bit of the attention of law enforcement. I just don't see an upside to it.
I'll tell you, Andy, it's much harder whenever we do our traffic stories to find people in the U.S. that are willing to talk to us. And for that cartel story in particular, this is what happened. We had to go to Sinaloa to ask permission from the high-ups in the cartel to talk to the cells here in the United States. And it took us a couple of trips, actually, to Sinaloa to finally get that go-ahead. And we spoke to sort of what was it? He's like a lieutenant kind of guy. He has people way above him, but he has a lot of people that work for him. And he was the one who supposedly had connections to cells here in the U.S. And so we met him a couple of times, and he told us he never travels to the U.S., that everything is done, via encrypted messaging apps and whatnot. And he said after months, he kept on giving us dates, and it never worked out. You never know where we're going to go tomorrow. It could be like tomorrow in, I don't know, Idaho. And then we'd like have everything set to go to Idaho. And then he turns out and says, I'm sorry, I was wrong. We can't, my guys aren't available. And then eventually he said, okay, it's the meeting is here. It's in a town. I believe it was in Minnesota. We get to Minnesota. We traveled, and he calls us and says, just kidding. It wasn't actually there. It's in another state, and you're not able to disclose what that state is, but meet us there. And I travel all the way there. And then it was him. And he told me he lied to me. And it was the first thing I said when I saw him. So after all, Lieutenant, it's you. You tell me you never traveled to the U.S. and it's you here. And he says, yeah, I couldn't tell you the truth, but it's me. So he agreed to talk to me and show me the cocaine business. But I ended up talking to a Mexican, not an American. And then the gringo, who was the one American that I spoke to us because he had contacted me. He'd seen the show. He was interested in what I was doing. He was interested in the fact that I don't judge, that I try to understand. And he's been living this life for so many years, and he thinks that maybe one day he'll be killed or go to jail, and he wanted to share his story.
So El Gringo is an interesting one. Smuggling drugs on domestic Delta flights.
You watched the episode. Good.
Well, it's fascinating. And again, I'm not involved in any level of criminal organization, but I travel substantially. And I know that not all security is the same, and international and domestic have different screening policies. But man, if I was trying to move drugs, I would not do it at a place that I know has a security screening. I mean, I guess I would get a truck or a vehicle or something like that. I'm just fascinated if you could explain how that scheme or operation works, and what is it about domestic flights that's even allowing this to be able to happen?
Yeah, I was shocked as well. When I asked him how are the drugs distributed in the U.S., I really didn't expect. I was thinking like vans or trucks or.
That's what somebody would say, because hey, our stuff gets X-rayed. TSA makes me take my shoes off. It might be a little bit harder to smuggle cocaine, but apparently not.
It is. You're definitely going through law enforcement.
Yes, intentionally. You're going to encounter security screening. Maybe let's not take drugs. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, what he said is that they don't check. When it's domestic flights that they don't check, it's a faster way. They employ
Ah,
usually women, usually a lot of plain strippers, and that they're willing to do it for money. And it's the fastest and easiest way to get like 10 kilos of fentanyl or whatever from the West Coast to the East Coast. And he said the likelihood of if you fly from California to any state on the East Coast, the likelihood that that plane has that at least one of the bags has drugs in it is very, 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 very high. He said it was surprising. Yeah.
haven't we spent billions of dollars, if not hundreds of billions of dollars post 9/11 creating the TSA and enhanced security procedures? I thought we had tackled this one.
Yeah. And instead, it's us not carrying drugs, having to take off our shoes and our small little bottles of water.
I mean,
It's
so
like,
I have a miniature dachshund who is all of 12 and a half pounds. He's a service animal. He obviously doesn't go through the x-ray conveyor, even though that's what happens in all the movies, and then the dog skeleton comes across. So I carry him, and then they swipe my hands for explosive residue because I have to go through the metal detector instead of the x-ray chicken cooker machine where you have your arms up. So I'm doing all that, right? I got my mini dachshund. I'm getting swabbed for explosives. And you're telling me that they're just stuffing 10 kilos of fentanyl in a check bag because it's a stripper and she's getting away with it? I mean, I feel like we have our priorities misaligned here from the TSA perspective.
I was absolutely shocked as well. Shocked. I don't know if it's 10. Yeah, around 5 or 6, I'd say. But yeah, it's crazy. And the fact that they have their preferred carriage, which is Delta, was interesting too.
I wonder why that is. Because I'm not aware of whether or not the airlines do their own baggage screening. I thought for some reason that it was all controlled and
It has nothing to do with the screening. It had only to do with the fact that Delta has a great that you can take up to a certain amount if you're in a certain class for free in
yes.
terms of weight. It has to do with the weight and the fees that you pay, and not with the screening particularly.
As somebody who flies Delta, the medallion program is fantastic. I highly recommend everybody do it. Apparently, drug runners have already figured that out, so you're slightly behind the power curve. Yeah, I think it's 3 bags for free. I have not thought a single time of putting meth or fentanyl in there, though. Maybe I am actually missing out and not thinking correctly.
I can connect you to some people, Andy.
No, that's a hard pass. I enjoy not spending time in prison. So,
Yes. Me too.
um, one thing I think is interesting, especially through Western eyes, American eyes, it's easy to fall in the trap when you talk about cartels of pointing externally. And this is, it's only people that have a different moral view or ethical view or even a different visual perspective, right? Different levels of melanin in their skin. But as you mentioned, the more I've talked with people about this angle of American facilitators continues to pop its head up. And sometimes it's through the lens of people who are doing straw purchases for weapons in southern border states. And they are, the Iron River, as they called it. I think it was a half a
Yep.
million.
I did.
It was 500,000 guns last year alone.
Yeah, I did a story about that in season 1. Guns.
Yeah. How is it just money? I mean, how are the cartels, the recruitment, finding the right people to me is fascinating. And, and I've talked with some ex-agency officers, and I talk with them about recruitment as well, too. How do you think they do it? How do you think they pick the people that they know are going to be susceptible? Are they looking for higher risk people? Because it takes time. I assume they're just not driving down the road in an A-team van looking for people to throw money at it. Do you have any idea of how they spend their time recruiting these people?
Yeah, trust is the most important thing. So usually it's family members
Mm.
or people that they've grown up with. So usually family members that have come to the United States and that they can really trust, or again, yeah, people that they know very well. So trust, I think, would be the number one most important. But I think you touched upon an important thing there, which is none of this would exist, right, without the buyers in the United States and without the supply of guns in the United States. So it goes both ways, right? It's the consumers of these drugs that allow this business to flourish here in the United States. And it's the easy supply of guns from the United States down to Mexico that allows the cartels to survive. Because without the guns and without the violence, they wouldn't be able to run their operation. And I think, in many ways, they're, you can look at Mexico and see it as being very lucky to have such a powerful and rich neighbor, but also very unlucky, right? Because Their neighbor, their, you look at the numbers and the thousands of people that are killed every year because of because of the drug violence in Mexico. I mean, in my profession alone, the hundreds of journalists that have been killed since the start of the drug wars in Mexico. And it's really tragic. And I don't think that that would happen if it weren't for the fact that geography, if it weren't for the fact that they're neighbors with the United States. You look at the biggest money makers in Mexico is the oil business, it's the tourism business, and these dwarf in comparison with the money that is being made by the drug business. And again, the buyers, the business all happens basically mainly here in the United States, and we can't forget that. And yeah, we can point the finger, as you say, and say it's all that everything they're to blame. It's all Mexico and to Mexican government. But I think we have to take a deep look at what we're doing and take responsibility for where we, for the responsibility that we have in all this, basically.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard me talk about Firecracker Farm and their hot salt. You've probably heard other people talk about it as well. If you haven't tried it yet, let me just tell you, you're missing out on some serious flavor. Their hot salt is delicious, and it really makes pretty much anything that you put it on even more delicious. It's hot, but when you use it in moderation, it's not too hot, and the flavor that it adds enhances without overpowering. It is handmade, super premium, and comes in awesome stainless steel push-button grinders like the one I have in my hand right here. You can take them anywhere. Hot sauce, if you've had this experience, can very easily overpower other flavors and always runs out quickly when it's good. Hot salt lasts and lasts. The push grinder holds over 500 plus pumps, and when you consider the refill it comes with, it's thousands of servings, and it's a great deal and a lot cheaper than the sauce. For those of you that like flavor but hesitate because it might be too hot, you can mix it with sea salt to tone it down and still enjoy the awesome flavor. In my personal experience, you can modulate how much comes out of the dispenser. You're in total control of the amount of heat you serve yourself. So if you would like to support our show and give Alex and his family business a shot, head over to firecracker.farm and use the code Ironclad to get a 15% discount on your first order. You will be very glad that you did. Firecracker.farm. If you are into quality gear and you are not subscribed to TacPack, well, then you're missing out. TacPack is a monthly subscription box loaded with professional-grade tactical gear from trusted brands like Battle Arms Development, 9-Line, 511 Tactical. You have two options. You have the TacPack Standard, which is a $59.95 shipped with a value that usually lands between $90 and $120. Or you have the TacPack Plus, which is $139.95 shipped, packed with about $240 to $300 worth of gear. But here's the kicker. The September TacPack Plus is coming in hot, worth over $330, and it's featuring a record amount of gear. And right now, if you use the code Ironclad, you're gonna get a free tactical gift worth $70, bringing your total value to over $400 just for signing up. So visit TacPack.com, use the code Ironclad, and get the kind of gear that doesn't just sit on the shelf. It's interesting. You mentioned the hundreds of journalists in Mexico that have been killed. What seems to be the difference between those that are targeted and those that are not? I mean, you yourself went down and met with the Sinaloa cartel in an attempt to be able to meet with somebody in the U.S. Yeah. Is there some unspoken or perhaps very spoken line that these people are crossing? Okay.
Except they're way braver than I am. These are people who are exposing corruption, exposing the ways the cartel operate. Usually it's corruption that gets them killed, right? And it's usually not about the corruption of the cartel itself. It's how the cartel is corrupting politicians or local business leaders. It's once they start reporting on that's what gets them killed. The reporting I do is very different. I am definitely, I always say that they are the unsung heroes. They are the ones, when people say that the reporting I do is brave, I appreciate that, but it's actually nothing compared to what these people who have a lot less resources than I do as a Western journalist, who don't have the privilege of going back to the safety of their own homes like I do here in the United States. They, live amongst the crime. That is, they're surrounded by the crime and by the criminals that they're trying to expose. I'm always, I find the reporting that they do and the people that they are incredible. And I take great inspiration from them.
I know this question just is based off your personal experience, and I guess I'm asking you to hypothesize here. Corruption in Mexico, relative, not easy to document, but it is a long history of the documentation of the involvement in cartels and how far they've permeated. What would your hypothesis be? I know we touched on this briefly, whether it was local law enforcement, federal agencies here in the U.S. How high up do you think that the cartels have been able to create influence?
In the U.S., I mean, it's a hard question. I know, and I'll tell you what I've reported on. I've seen a woman with 4 kilos of fentanyl cross the border from Mexico to the U.S. And I've seen her being stopped by Border Patrol. And after she told me that some of that her boss basically pays money to certain Border Patrol agents at that
Hmm.
crossing, and I'm sure it happens at other crossings too, because I've also reported on other crossings as well on this, and that pays them to allow the drugs to come in. So Border Patrol corruption exists. I mean, you don't have to take it from me. You go online, you do a search. There have been many reports on this and people who've gotten in trouble for it. I know that it happens also in smaller towns in police offices and sheriff's offices and all that. How high does it go? I mean, I'm an optimist and I'm hoping that it doesn't go very far, but at the same time we have to be realists, and we're talking again about billions of dollars. And
Yeah.
when we did this story about human trafficking, and it was about coyotes and the business behind the human smuggling of people to the United States, of our immigrants to the United States. I interviewed a guy called the King Coyote. He's runs one of these biggest human smuggling operations down in Mexico, and he's responsible for bringing like 2,000 immigrants every week, I believe it was, from southern Mexico to the north, to the border with the U.S. and all the way to the U.S. And he was telling me how he they have his business. They have a human resources department. They have lawyers, American lawyers that they pay to monitor all the changes in the law. And it wouldn't shock me that if there's law enforcement or, government agencies paid in the process as well, because he runs a big operation.
Have you found that there is, specifically when talking about cartels in Mexico, have you found that there is one that is more effective or impactful with their influence north of the border, or is it all relatively the same across the board?
I mean, we know that the Sinaloa cartel has been running. I mean, they're responsible in large part for the fentanyl crisis in the United States. I was in Sinaloa in 2000, was it 2015 or 16? Uh, 2016, I believe. Yeah, they just started. The fentanyl crisis had just started here in the United States. Most people didn't even know what fentanyl was. I'd done the first story I'd ever did about the opiate crisis called the Oxycontin Express. This was in 2008. And then I did another story about how people who weren't being able to get access to the pills were then moving on and becoming addicted to heroin, which is another opiate. And then I started hearing from my sources that a lot of addicts were starting to use a new drug called fentanyl that was hitting the streets, but it was still sort of unknown. And it was a pharmaceutical drug, much like Oxycontin
Yep.
was initially. And I went down to Sinaloa and I interviewed members of the Sinaloa cartel who told me that they had hired a Colombian chemist. They had paid him, I believe, 40 something thousand dollars to teach them how to make fentanyl, because they were hearing that there was more demand for a new drug called fentanyl in the United States. And they learned how to make it. It was a great investment, 40,000, and they made, millions and millions of dollars from this drug, but they were the first ones. And they created a huge operation, a fentanyl operation that was shipping, millions, I don't know how much, but lots of fentanyl on a monthly basis to the United States. And it created the crisis that we were seeing. That year, when we did our story, New Hampshire was the only state, it was the first and only state at the time where more people were overdosing from fentanyl than from heroin.
Hmm.
And within a couple of months after our story came out, it started slowly changing to the point where, now fentanyl is the number one cause of opiate overdoses in the United States in every single state. And that was created very much by pharmaceutical companies here in the United States to begin with. It followed the exact same uh, um, blueprints that OxyContin back in the day. And then they realized, the cartel realized this was good business, and they started, you know, giving, producing those drugs for consumers here in the U.S.
Do you think it's possible to solve the demand problem? This is one I toil with, and I've landed on. I don't think there is.
I think what we're doing is not. It is whatever we're not doing at the Roma,
It's
right?
because we're not doing enough. We need another 20 years of the war on drugs.
Yeah, and more millions and millions of dollars, right? It's just it's crazy to think that we keep on trying the same thing and it's not working, and we keep on insisting on doing the same thing. It's just not working, right? You can police the borders all you want. You can, you know, build more walls. You can spend more money in trying to combat these cartels, but that is just not working. I think that the policing our we're not policing ourselves out of this crisis is not the solution. I think this is a public health crisis. If you go to Kensington outside in Philadelphia and you look at what is happening there. We did a story on fentanyl for this season, and where you have people that look, it is a horrible way to say it, but this is the reality. They look like zombies. They're bent, leaned over,
Is
walking
this
the
the
streets
trank
leaned over.
epidemic as well
Yeah,
too?
trank, yeah,
Yep.
trank dope.
Yep.
And people with wounds that look like they have leprosy,
Yeah.
full out. They have to be their limbs have to be sometimes amputated because the wounds are so massive and festering and creating gigantic infections that they have to be amputated. And there are people living, thousands of people all throughout the United States on the streets right now living this way. And we drive by them, all of us, every day. And nothing is being done. And meanwhile, we're spending millions on trying to combat the flow of drugs coming from Mexico, and it's not working. So I'm a strong believer in using that same money to address the public health crisis that is happening on our streets amongst Americans. These are not. We can both try. We can, if we want, try to forget and think that this would never happen to us. The vast majority of the people addicted, addicts that I've spoken to for the opiate crisis are people just like you and I who got an injury, went to the doctor, were given OxyContin back in the
Yep.
day, and created and became addicted because of it. So, we can call them junkies all we want, but any of us could become a junkie, and any of us could be living on the streets right now. And it's a disservice for all of us to not be treating this the way we should be treating. They're our fellow citizens, and they're dying, and it seems like we don't care. A million Americans have died in the past 20 something years because of the opiate crisis, and we have done nothing. 3,000 Americans died on 9/11, and we changed our government. We've spent millions of dollars trying to combat terrorism, and yet, 3,000 Americans die every week with addictions, both drug addiction and alcohol addiction, and it seems that we're incapable of trying to address this problem.
Meanwhile, strippers are taking bags full of drugs through Delta First Class Diamond Medallion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so easy to take an absolutist approach to the demand. Well, we need to drive it down to zero. And I don't think that's possible. I think the reductionist approach of doing everything we can to get it as close to zero is way more plausible than actually getting it at that literal and round number, because I just don't see that happening. But I definitely agree with you. I think we could do better.
Yeah. I also think that we should consider drastically radical changes. I think my country, I come from Portugal,
Mhm.
we legalized drugs, or we decriminalized drugs, which is different. So what we did is, if you're caught with a certain amount of drugs, instead of immediately going to prison, we give you an option. You can go to rehab or you can go to prison. The majority of people choose to go to rehab. And actually, it's less costly for the government to send somebody to rehab than it is to send them to prison. And it's been widely successful. I think it's been 20 years now. It's decreased the the prison population in Portugal. It decreased the AIDS, the number of AIDS patients with AIDS in Portugal. You know, um, drug-related violence, drug addiction, all of it went down because of this. And I know people usually say, but Portugal is a country of only 10 million people. How can you do it at scale here in the United States? Or people will tell me, well, we tried it in Oregon. They tried decriminalizing drugs there and it was a disaster. Yes, but you can look at Oregon, and what they didn't do was prepare. You have to have a structure in place, right? If a
Yeah.
person is deciding not to go to prison and they want to go to rehab, you need to make sure that you have those beds available and that you have that support group and the infrastructure ready to take in these people. That, from what I've been reading, was not the case in Oregon. And I think you approach it, yeah, it's at scale, but approach it, town by town, city by city, state by state. And there is a chance, because whatever we're doing right now is not working. So I think we need radical answers.
I want to thank our partners over at Ammo Squared. They've built what they call America's Ammunition Reserve. Basically, this is an ammo savings account. You can sign up, pick from more than 70 different calibers. You can set an auto-buy budget and either choose a shipping schedule, or you can just let your personal reserve grow. Over time, your ammo stacks up and is stored for free in their climate-controlled facilities in Texas and Idaho until you are ready to ship. There are no minimums. There's no extra fees. It works whether you have a small budget or you just don't want to drop a few grand all at once. Thank you so much, Ammo Squared, for providing this cool service and for supporting the show. Everybody, let's be real with each other for a second. Most doctors do not care about optimization. They do care about you, but they're checking your basic labs. They tell you that everything is looking normal, and they're going to send you on your way. Meanwhile, you're feeling tired, your performance is slipping, and you know that something is off, and that is where Merrick Health comes in. Merrick Health isn't your typical doctor's office. They're a next-level health optimization platform that actually listens to you, runs advanced lab testing, and helps you optimize your hormones, your metabolism, and your overall performance. So whether you're looking to boost your energy, maybe gain some muscle mass, or you just feel like you're not your best self anymore and you want to change that, Merrick gives you those tools and can help you make it happen. You have two options. You can go with their guided optimization program and get a dedicated health coach and medical provider to help you with supplements and prescription treatments. Or if you're more of a do-it-yourself type of person, you can order self-service lab tests and take control of your health on your own terms. The best part is, either option that you pick, you can get 10% off of your order right now. Just go to merrickhealth.com and use the code FOCALPOINT at checkout. That's MAREK health.com with the code FOCALPOINT for 10% off. Oregon is an interesting example. I was recently doing a podcast and I brought up the subject of Portland through the lens of what you're talking about. Hey, okay, we decriminalized and boy, that didn't work out well. And I had somebody who reached out to me and really broke it down for me where the failing in that system was. And the idea was that the decriminalization was supposed to be part of a harm reduction strategy. But, and this is the but that wasn't followed up with the decriminalization, they were supposed to take the assets that they had been using when it came to fighting the criminalization of drugs and put them into what you were talking about. The structured approach for the alternative to that. And guess what didn't happen? Exactly that. They decriminalized, but didn't apply or align any other assets. So yeah, your plan's going to fall on its face. And so it's easy to say that doesn't work. But and again, we only have an N of one that we're talking about in Portland, but that control wasn't executed in the way that it was supposed to. So yeah, the outcome isn't going to be what you want it to be. It makes me wonder what would have happened if they would have put that energy, effort, money, manpower, resources, all of those things, because it didn't happen. So yeah, of course, decriminalizing drugs without the support network that these people need. I mean, how could you expect anything else if that's all you do? You're just like, okay, yeah, cops don't arrest those people anymore. Yeah, that's going to be a nightmare.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. And it's sad because we're finally trying to figure out a way to give answers to this gigantic problem, and we failed at our first attempt, and now it's being seen as an example as why we shouldn't try that. But actually, look at the example of Portugal. Here's a country where it did succeed, so there's no reason why it wouldn't be able to succeed here if we do it correctly,
Yeah.
right? And that's, I think, where it failed. I no interest in legalizing drugs. I don't have a personal interest in trying to legalize drugs. I know, I see it through my reporting, through my personal life. I'm the mother of a 15-year-old kid. I know how dangerous it is. I know how crazy it might sound that we should legalize all those drugs. What I and so yeah, it's not no personal interest here. And I realize that there is a lot of danger in that as well. But I do also see that there is, again, I'm going to repeat this because I don't think it's talked about enough. This isn't a drug problem. It's not a violence problem. It's not a cartel problem. This is a public health problem. Our Americans, our American citizens, our friends, many times our friends, our families, people that we know are dying. And we are not taking this and we're not doing enough. So we have to change our thinking and try to come up with a completely different approach to whatever we've done so far. And maybe legalization is possibly the way, because so far it's the only one that I've seen has worked anywhere else.
Yeah. Wanted to shift gears here with you a little bit. I know, so season 5 is out. One of the episodes you did was called Brides for Sale, which essentially is following trafficked brides from Vietnam to China. Again, criminal underworld, I suppose. Different expression. Can you unpack for the listeners what that episode was about and what you uncovered?
Absolutely. It was such a crazy trade. So there's, because of the one child policy in China for many years, families were only allowed to have one child. When they found out the sex, if it was a female, they would actually abort
Mm-hmm.
because sons are usually the providers for families later on. And so there's a lot more men in China than there are women. And because of it, culturally, it's looked down upon for a man to be single. You want a man who marries, who has kids, who gives his parents grandchildren. And there's an enormous pressure on men to get married and have children. And there aren't enough women in China. So they had to figure out a way to be able to find those women. So whenever there is a demand, there is going to be a supply, particularly in the black market. So there started these criminal groups in neighboring countries, in this case is in Vietnam, that started looking for vulnerable women, a lot of times from small minority groups like the Hmong communities in Vietnam, tribal community and indigenous community. And they started, these are poor people who, a lot of times can't send their daughters to schools, and they work in farms and farming. And they started going out these to the countryside and sometimes kidnapping them in broad daylight, or paying the family to bring these kids to what they would say was going to be work in China, but essentially was trafficking them to China and then forcing them to stay there, to marry, to have children, and in many cases imprisoning, raping, and in some cases possibly killing, because many of these women have disappeared. So nobody knows exactly what happened to them. It's a horrific trade, and it's still happening.
Would you say the organization behind that is analogous to a cartel as well, or what's the vernacular that they use for those organizations?
Yeah, it's a criminal organization. It's a human trafficking organization that operates on the border between China and Vietnam. And we worked closely, we were monitored the whole time we were in Vietnam. The press is closely monitored. I mean, particularly foreign press that is coming to report on something that's a sensitive subject for them. So we had a government minder with us at all times that was actually traveling with a police officer as well. They reviewed all our questions before we sat down for interviews,
Mm.
and they would get mad at me because I wouldn't stick to the questions they allowed me to ask. Um, and then we found out that our car was bugged and that they were listening to, and our phones were bugged, and they were listening to all our conversations, which made our job very, very, very hard. We were essentially trying to get people on the other side, right? The traffickers, the victims, but mostly the trafficker, to talk to us and tell us what they were doing and why they were doing it and how they were doing it. And eventually we were able to team up with the group of incredibly brave Chinese journalists that were able to film undercover because they weren't being watched by the government. And they went to the border between Vietnam and China, and they reported on both the Vietnamese side and on the Chinese side. And we were able to see, yeah, people selling girls on. They had catalogs of girls. Some looked like they were 13, 14 years old, on their phones, and they would show these potential buyers the phones. The undercover journalist pretended they were buyers, interested buyers, and they had, yeah, all these people selling them girls. It was horrific.
I'm assuming that they withhold the travel documents from the women as well, so they can't travel in that way. But what kind of consequence? I'm sure that doesn't stop some of
Some,
them. What kind of
yeah,
consequences do they
sometimes.
face if they try to escape?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they don't even have travel documents. They're literally kidnapped. They're, poor families. They don't have passports. They don't have
Yeah.
documents. They're kidnapped, broad daylight. They're taken across in the middle of the night across the border. So the Chinese authorities don't, so many times don't even know they're there. And then they're taken to these houses, apartments, and forced to have kids. I spoke to one of the victims, horrible story. She was also taken against her will. She was locked in a room. Her supposed husband that she was forced to get married with, came in, would have sex with her. She eventually had two kids that she gave birth, I believe, in the bedroom. And she was able to keep, to stay close to her kids because they grew up in the house, but she wasn't really allowed to leave the house. And eventually, when the kids were a little older, I believe they were like 7 or 8 years old, she was given the choice to go back home to her family, to freedom, or to stay and live imprisoned in the house and stay with her kids. And it was a horrific choice. I mean, even talking about this gets me emotional. She obviously started crying while telling me the story because obviously she had chosen to come back to Vietnam and to be reunited with her family, and she had to leave her kids behind. And as a mother myself, you can only imagine what that choice is like, right?
I have 3 kids of
She
my
had
own.
to
I
live
can't
with the rest
fathom
of her life.
somebody, yeah,
Yeah.
saying,
Sorry.
"Hey, yeah, you get to spend the rest of your life with your kids. You don't get to do anything, or you can go live your life and never see your kids again." I mean, come on. Is there a harder choice?
Yeah, that's exactly it, and that's what she had to do, and yeah, that living with that guilt for the rest of your life, feeling that you've abandoned your children, but at the same time, I mean, what is that choice, right? Is it really a choice?
Yeah.
It's horrible.
I mean, here's
Yep.
maybe a stupid question. How could China, in that one child policy that valued men over women, not realize that they were going to have a problem in the future with not having enough women around? How could they, how did they even implement this policy?
Yeah, it's, I
I
think
mean, the
I
math
don't
doesn't
think
math on that
politicians
one.
I don't think politicians think much beyond the 4 years or 5 years that they're in power, unfortunately, I don't think that there's a lot of, thought process. They knew they had a problem with overpopulation. They needed to figure something out. They decided this was a good idea.
Oof.
And it wasn't legal at the time. They weren't allowing women to abort when they found out the sexes. You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
But obviously, many families did, and that's the unintended consequences of a terrible policy.
Yeah. With, they're still going to continue to have a population crisis, actually, as it goes forward. It's probably slowly nosing its way over the bell curve. Uh, Mariana, the world you have immersed yourself in is fascinating to me. Not because I'm, again, just always going to throw this disclaimer out, not because I'm pursuing a career in that, but it is something that I have no experience with. But in the things you're describing, having that conversation with the woman with the 2 children, and she's given the choice that she was given, and she took the choice. And I'm sure that's not the only conversation you've had like that, but it seems as if you are constantly looking at the seedy underbelly of humanity. What does that do to your sense of humanity, the way you view humans? Does it jade you at all? Have you lost a little bit of faith in humanity? Where does these experiences that you've made a professional career out of, where does that land with you looking in the rearview mirror?
Yeah, I would say I wouldn't be able to do this job if I wasn't a an optimist. I am. It is a lot. I have very depressing conversations. It is an interesting job because in many ways, you feel guilty about what you do because for us it's just like a day trip in somebody else's nightmare, right? I think I,
Totally.
I remember a journalist explaining it this way once, and it really stuck with me because that's what it is, right? I sit down with this woman, I hear her horrific story, I come back and I hope my viewers will watch it and I can have some sort of impact. But it's not my life, right? My life is incredibly different from that. And I get again, the privilege of coming back home and leading a very different life and with all the privilege that I have and have had all my life in many ways. I say all the time, we won the lottery, right? Just
Yeah.
based on the place and time and where we were born, we won the lottery. So it is a little bit I find it my responsibility. What do you do with that good fortune, right? And how can you make an impact in the world around you? Um, so all this to say that in many of these very hard interviews that I have with victims, I also interview a lot of the people that we consider the bad guys, the traffickers, the smugglers, the scammers, and I'm able to find humanity in them. I'm able to understand, why they ended up being the pimps or the gun traffickers or the sicarios in Mexico. It is not, uh, if you hear their stories and you understand where they come from, it is not difficult for you to realize that it could have been you and that you could have made the same choices that they made. Sometimes it's actually the lack of choices, right? And so to be able to find humanity and kindness and connection in the people that we consider the worst of our society, and realize that it is because of the lack of opportunities and because of inequality that they end up doing what they do, has given me a lot of hope in the world. It's not; these are not unsolvable problems. It's not as if X amount of the population is born bad and there is no way to redeem them or to bring them back to the right side of the law. That is not the case. It's the systems that are broken. It's the inequality, massive inequality, at all-time high inequality that exists in the world. And that is what is creating these black markets and in many ways forcing these people to work in these black markets. And until we fix that, we're not going to, violence is not going to decrease and these black markets aren't going to go anywhere. So yeah, so I'm at the end of the day, I'm actually quite not jaded. I'm quite the opposite. I'm quite hopeful about humanity and the possibility of kindness in everyone.
I mean, that's a great headspace to be in. I don't know if I could arrive in that headspace, but I applaud you for being able to maintain that outlook. And it brings me, this is always a tough question, especially on these topics, but it brings me to my last question for you today. The internet is such a fascinating place. We'll have this conversation, we'll hit upload at some point, and I don't know who's going to listen to it. But I would say for most people, if they're like me, they're a very average person. You're consumed with your day to day. You're not involved, hopefully, in organized crime, or maybe you even interface with it to a degree, but you don't even recognize or realize it.
Right.
So for the average person, whatever that may mean to anybody listening to this or watching this, what would you say to somebody, though, when it comes to anything that they can do to either raise awareness or support efforts to combat human trafficking, like we're kind of talking about with the brides, or cartel influence specifically here in the U.S.? What advice would you give to people? Because a lot of people will say, this sounds horrible, but it has nothing to do with me.
Mm-hmm. I would say, first of all, be informed, right? So watch traffic, listen to your podcast, listen to my upcoming podcast. I have a podcast launching in October called The Hidden Third. Be informed, know what's happening and why these things are happening, right? Uh, Understanding what is at the center, what's at the origin of the drug violence, understanding why human trafficking exists is incredibly important for awareness. And quite frankly, these black and gray markets make up for a third of the global economy, an estimated 35% of the global economy.
Wow.
So they're not somewhere else in the world hidden in tunnels and undergrounds. They're right here. They're on it's your neighbor, it's your down the street, they're all around us. And they have a huge impact on all our lives, whether we're talking about the opiate crisis or guns or immigration. These are all issues that directly affect every single one of our lives. So being aware, having knowledge, understanding why, how they exist is incredibly important. So I think, yeah, tuning in.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think it starts with at least educating yourself. Then you can know what to look for or what to
Education.
avoid. Better than burying your head in the sand, which is an approach I took for many years. Got me nowhere, but except for a sandy nose and mouth. So
yeah, I think a lot of people say like they love my show, but there are certain episodes they can't watch or they can't watch at all because it's too heavy and too dark.
those are
Yeah,
the ones you
that's a
have to
choice
watch.
that's a choice you can make.
Yeah.
But I can guarantee that at the end of that hour of listening to your podcast or my podcast or my show, that they will come out much more informed and will be able to make better choices in life and, actually possibly, become part of a movement for change.
Yeah. Well, that's a great ending. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the continued work you're doing on all of these topics. I'm glad there are people out there like you willing to jump into this pool just cannonball style.
Oh, thank you, Andy. And thank you for all the work that you do as well.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can learn more about Mariana's work by checking out Trafficked on National Geographic and Hulu. Thanks for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. See you all next week with an all-new episode and an all-new guest.